much. I really don't want to talk about mobility today. I want to talk about movement. And that is because movement is really the life of cities. Cities actually emerged to provide proximity between us, to meet, to go to work, to access services, and most importantly, to trade, to exchange goods. Despite the digital transitions, I will say that our urban economies still rely greatly on movement, so much so that I will call them our movement economies. Think if we get stuck, which might be where we are heading, think lockdown, that is how society and the economy is going to be affected unless we enable movement in cities. Now, movement can be understood, it can be modeled, it can be explained, and it can even be predicted at different scales. Something like 400, 800 meters radius, which reflects short trips. Or, let's say, 1 kilometer to 3-4 kilometers, which reflects movement between different areas of the city. Or, at a global scale, let's call it, which reflects movement across the whole city and beyond. The urban form is what actually determines movement to the greatest extent. The shape of a street network actually determines where we are likely to go, what routes we choose, and how we decide to get there. Urban form results from the relationships between buildings, plots, and streets design. Now, in all towns, these relationships generated small blocks which provided connectivity and proximity to a variety of things before the car came into our lives. But as cities developed with motorized transport in mind, then blocks became bigger and bigger as we moved from the center outwards towards the perimeter, towards the periphery. These large blocks are problematic because they pose a barrier to movement. Just think about getting around a block of that size, 48,000 plus square meters. Now, there is a space and a place for these blocks in cities. We need them sometimes, hospitals, schools, and so on. But where we place them, how we manage the environment around it, and how we provide access to them is vital in enabling movement. So, to enable movement, we should consider these places first and foremost public spaces. And then what we need to do is to enable movement within them, either by walking or by cycling at somewhat longer distances. Then we need to be able to reach everywhere else by public transport. I want to look a little bit at this historical urban form because it is a very good model to support walkability. So, this is what it looks like, or rather a modern version of it. Malls are very successful places, especially in Cyprus where they are quite recent. And we know why they're very successful places. And that is because they are completely pedestrianized. This is the place you cannot drive past the shop, let alone park in front of it. Not even emergency vehicles, as far as I know, can get in here. And the second reason is that the units are very small. We don't have these large blocks which impede movement. The frontages of the shops are continuous. They have no gaps between them. So it decreases the amount it takes to go from one to the next. The uses are mixed. Okay, there is no residential uses here, but it provides retail, catering, entertainment, some services like ATMs, hairdressers, and so on. And the scale is walkable. We know what is a walkable scale, 400, 500 meters. The Nicosia Mall specifically is about 600 meters in length. 300 meters in length, 2 floors, 600 meters, compare it to Annex Artesias, which is around 700. Within that, you get to see around 130 units. If I were to walk 600 meters on one of the major roads in our cities, which are currently classified as a commercial corridor, I would be lucky to see around 20 shops. So what has been done is we've taken some of the characteristics of historical city center and moved them to a large block of the mall, which in fact, within the block, it functions as a city center in itself. Coincidence or not, the Nicosia Mall brands itself as the center of Nicosia. At the same time, we have taken some characteristics, some properties of this historical center out of them, and we have enabled cars to go through them in an environment which is actually really meant for walking. And by doing that, we have actually diminished their economic potential, which has gone to the mall. So what we need to do is we need to, in fact, like the most problematic environment in our cities is this one, in between. It's very large. It does not serve a specific purpose, like a hospital or a school. We need to get there, but once we are there, we need to keep going, but it doesn't enable us to go somewhere else efficiently. So we've taken some of the characteristics of historical centers into the large blocks of the mall, and we need to take some of these characteristics back to the historical city center. But we also need to take some of these to specific parts of these in-between places in our cities. Then what we need to do is to enable movement sustainably between them. And trust me, that is actually the easiest part. How do we do this? We need to do different things at different scales. We cannot use the same policies and actions in places that have completely different spatial and physical characteristics. At the small scale, we need tactics, we need plans to operate at the mid-scale, and we need strategies to operate at the large scale on the interconnections between different places. Now, tactics are very, very important because there is a high risk that plans and strategies end up on the shelf and do not get implemented. Tactics are things that you can do quickly, you can do at low cost, you can implement them, you can remove them, you can adjust them, and you can make them permanent. And what they do, if we start working with tactics, they can pave the way for buying from the public and from stakeholders and for testing solutions to be implemented through plans and strategies. I don't have the time to go through specific examples of tactics, so I've put some references there. What I want to do is to focus for a little bit on the higher level, on the strategies, and how we make these effective. We really need to move to real spatial planning. What we have at the moment is not. We can no longer work with zones that do not reflect the spatial characteristics and the urban qualities of places. The greatest difficulty in achieving an urban form that enables movement is the lack of centrality in our in-between areas. We need to develop proximity and accessibility in these areas to achieve polycentricity. Now, what we know is that cities that function well in terms of movement have a hierarchy of centers, a center, a sub-center, a local center, and so on. Polycentricity does not mean having exclusively self-contained centers that function independently of each other, and it doesn't mean being able to get everywhere within 15 minutes walk or cycle. It is not realistic. This is not what cities are. We need to be able to move in between areas for different areas to mutually benefit socially and economically from each other. So what we need to do is to first identify the places which have the greatest potential to become local centers. The focus of the neighborhood, call it the local high street, if you want. How we identify these, we can discuss in a whole other research presentation. But once we have done this, we can define areas from those centers that are at a walkable distance of 400 meters or a 5 minutes walk. And these are really the areas that should be the focus of a set of policies towards mixed land use and towards densification, aiming at intensively improving the centrality, the proximity, and accessibility of these areas. Then we can go to the next scale, the 800 meters, the 10 minutes walk. Now, these areas should still be the focus of policies, but perhaps a little bit less intensive. And then we can go to the 15-minute scale, again, a little bit intensive policies, but at this point, you have the typical scale of a functioning neighborhood where you can start planning for infrastructure and service delivery. And then we move to the next step, identifying even smaller local centers which can serve a smaller area of walkable distance in between the in-between areas. So what we need to achieve is this hierarchy. We need to have a main city center, we need to have sub-centers, we need to have local centers, and we need to connect these sub-centers directly to the main center, which is kind of what we have at the moment. We should do it more by bus or cycle routes. But then we need to connect the sub-centers between them. We need to connect this to the local centers. So what we really need to enable movement, to create the urban form that enables movement, is really strategic densification in the right places through specific policies in very defined areas to enable polycentricity and to enable movement across the whole city. We need truly spatial planning to be able to do this. Thank you.